Now, the last year has been an extraordinary one, of course, in so many ways, and there's so many different aspects of it to reflect on now and into the future. But one of many concerns, of course, has been for young people and how they've coped with all the pandemic has thrown at them. And to look at that, now I'm going to hand over to Kate Christopher, an RE teacher, National RE Advisor at RE Today, to look at how, with her panel, to look at how young people have engaged with religion and spirituality through the past year. So, hello, Kate.
Hi, thanks so much, Hannah, and thanks to everyone for having me here today. Just for full disclosure, I don't work for RE Today anymore, although it's a fantastic national organisation. I'm now an independent RE advisor. I've joined my own splinter cell, but I do represent Cullen St Gabriel's, a charity and endowed trust. So as Hannah said, I'm a secondary teacher of RE, religious education, and an RE advisor. And my own research in the philosophy of education is in the ways we think about and make sense of religion in society, not just religion, belief, community, diversity and dissent. And for myself, I'm interested in what we do and we don't choose to share with our young people. So for this brief discussion now, for this next half hour for our lunch break, I'm very pleased to have 4 speakers with us who have interesting insights to share with us about how young people have engaged with religion, belief and spirituality through the pandemic and through the lockdowns. As Rowan Williams was saying in his keynote this morning, the pandemic has changed a lot. It's changed a lot about our society. So how do we start to investigate and make sense of this? So I think actually as we have quite a short amount of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of our 4 speakers. Welcome to all 4 of you. I can see you now, all Jaspreet, Iso, Mary and Nikwat. Lovely to see you all. I think I'll ask you to introduce yourselves briefly when you address the questions. To everyone else, please put questions in the chat if you have them. We might not get round to them, but I think we still have to see what you're thinking. Maybe if you make it clear it is a question, not a general comment, that would be helpful. So I've got 4 questions to ask. I'll pose the question. And speakers, if you'd like to indicate that you want to address the question, I'll bring you in and then you can briefly introduce yourselves when we get started. Okay, thanks so much. So our first question then, has the way communities of religion and belief support people changed during the pandemic? Has the way communities of religion and belief support people changed during the pandemic? I think you just wave at me. I'll bring you in. Would you like to start us off, Iso? Thanks so much. Over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Iso Neville. I'm social media officer for the Church of England. I think the way that these communities have supported people has changed during the pandemic. I think there's been much more focus on what their local individual communities really need. I think we've seen in the past potentially more preference for kind of broadcasting the message that these communities want to give out, which often is a great message and has been communicated really well. But I think in the kind of trauma and tragedy of the past year, communities of faith and religion have really started to look at what their local communities need and what is the most pressing demand and concern at the moment. I think my job is in social media, so digital is quite a big part of what I think about as well. And I think digital poverty has been one of those things that churches have really tried to address. I've seen Church at 5, which is in East Finchley in London. They've created a WhatsApp church. So every day, I think it's up to kind of 9 or 10 videos are sent on this WhatsApp chat. And that's so that people can kind of hotspot on Wi-Fi networks outside community centres. So it's free and they can just download these things and engage with church as they're going. And so that's been a really kind of pivotal thing that we've seen, churches engaging in innovative and new ways to fit the local demand.
Fantastic. Thanks for kicking us off, Iso. It's fascinating, isn't it? Less broadcasting a message, more really getting involved, maybe at a very granular level. What need? Would any of your other speakers like to speak? Nikwat, I see your mic's off. Are you? Is that a sign?
Yeah, I suppose I'll take it as a sign. If I'm
Thanks.
religious or religiously minded people, let's assume it's a sign of some sort. I'll be very sincere and say that this is a question that I thought about a little bit yesterday. And I don't think it's something that I'm well versed or educated enough to be able to say. And obviously, I just want to preface this with I'm still learning. So if I say anything which is incorrect or anything which is wrong, please do forgive me because I'm still going on this path and on this journey. I'm going to talk about my experience in the sense of how I have adapted during religion and spirituality. And I made a few notes because sometimes I've got myself in trouble just from talking from the heart. So I thought that's what I was going to do, but I'm going to preface it in a way which I do such a thing, but I make sure that I logically put together what I'm going to say as well. So for me, during the pandemic, I connected a lot more to the source energy. And the reason that I call it source energy is because I'm a Muslim. It's something that I believe in the sense of omnimism. So in the sense that each individual faith carries within it some semblance of relevance or some semblance of truth. And I think fundamentally, every single one of us connects to the same thing differently. We do it differently dependent upon what specific background we come from and the symbolism in which that occurs from. And I believe that very strongly. I believe it from my heart. And actually, again, I'm speaking very sincerely with you. So during the pandemic for myself and how I began to adapt myself and change during the pandemic is I became a lot more spiritually minded. So I'm someone who's Muslim. I'm not the most devout, but I pray, I eat halal, I treat people well, and everything in between is my own fallibilities and my own relationship with my sense of creation. Ramadan last year put me on a path. I think it was the perfect storm in one sense. The fact that you're having this global pandemic, which is forcing you to have to slow down and forcing you to look internally. And again, I would be very honest and say it was that time in which I recognized that I had a very bad drug addiction. And it was so odd that during Ramadan, the first time I'd done it in 10 years, I really looked inwardly. I thought, well, where is this behavior coming from? What is that level of spiritual deficit that's taken me into this place and this space? And I was delighted that that was the first time in 10 years that I actually kept all of my fasts throughout the whole of the year. And that moved me away from something which I recognized that I'm bringing harm in towards myself. I moved away from behaviors that were harming me. I got myself out of debt. I was in debt for many, many, many years due to poor life decisions. And obviously, I think, and I say this as a person of spiritual persuasion, I think what tends to happen through my experiences, there tends to be a focus on, I guess, what will be, as opposed to recognizing that as human beings, we have power of autonomy and choice of our own decisions. There's a really good parable in the Quran, or story that's told about something called Tie Your Camel, in which the Prophet, peace be upon him, goes into a masjid and somebody is going into this mosque. And they leave this camel there, and someone goes to him and says, aren't you going to tie your camel up? And he says, no, it's okay, God will look after it. So he goes into the mosque, he comes down, and his camel's gone. And he's saying, what the hell? Why didn't God look after my camel? And he speaks to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and says, what happened? Why didn't God look after my camel? And the Prophet just very directly says to him, did you tie your camel? He goes, no. He goes, well, tie your camel. And inside of that, there's a story which is we have responsibility, we have power over what we do and the choices in which we have. It's really, really, really important. And so as I continue down that path, it's been really wonderful for me because I have developed much more of a routine. I pray every day. I make sure that I do good deeds as much as I can by reference to people. And it's put me on a much better path as to where I am at this moment. So it's really helped shift my own support in towards my own self. And it's broadened my mind even more so to understand that I believe really strongly with conviction that every single one of us comes from the very same source energy. So all of us are here today. We've been put together into this panel. There's like 60 odd of us on this Zoom panel, right? But every single decision and every single choice that you've made has brought you into this point. We are all sharing this at this moment in time. We speak through people and we connect through people and we learn lessons through people. So it's just a wonderful term. And Jasper, please correct me if I'm wrong about Insiki, about Ekta, which is the idea of oneness. And I believe that and I understand that because there was scientifically this wonderful flash of light that brings in together all of the particles and atoms into existence. Then at the same time, you have the story of creation where God, the entity, the force, whatever you want to call it, brings together all of the world forming in the way in which it does. And that's in essence as to who we are. If all of us come from the same source energy, we're connected from the same thing. Literally everything around us is off the same thing. So for me, it's been a period of transformation. during the pandemic, and I think I've spoken a little bit too much. So let me
No,
say,
not at all.
okay, well, good.
It's wonderful to hear you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is almost our only sort of religious, as it were, slice of the day. So thank you so much. And how fascinating to hear about this idea of source energy. So it sounds like it's almost been a positive experience for you, although obviously, I guess, fairly traumatic.
Yes.
Has that? Do you find that your community, I guess your local religious community, has that been a positive? Have you found the support that you need? Like, have you been able to tap in to what you need?
I'll be very honest with you, Kate. Like, I oh, I'm gonna get in trouble, but I'm just gonna say it. I really like Islam. I really like faith. I really like Sikhi. I really like Judaism. I really like Christianity. I love all faiths, but we're humans, and we get, and I do. I'm a fallible person. We get a lot of things wrong. We don't always do things in the best way or the right way, and I actually kind of stopped going to the mosque, which isn't probably something that I'm supposed to do, but I found that when I was going there and when I was listening to a lot of what was being said and even trying to question, there's the very first verse word that was revealed to the Prophet, peace be upon him, was Iqra, which means to read. And we're told as Muslims to believe with a believer's heart. So I think there's a difference in faith with believers and followers. I think when you believe something, you understand it with conviction, you can back up what you have to say, you can speak from the heart, and you can have that sort of discussion with people. But I think there's a difference with being a follower, which is when you take something on the basis of literalism, as you see the far right do and right-wing people do within America, to be able, all across the world actually, to be able to justify very regressive opinions to the basis of religion, when I believe very strongly faith has been a point of social progress all throughout humanity and all throughout society. So I actually stopped going to the mosque, and now I mostly pray at home, to be honest with you. And I take my time to educate myself and read with people. But I love being in these kind of spaces because this
Wonderful.
is what I hear from
Wonderful. I mean, that's just, when I think about all the reporters here frantically scribbling notes, that's maybe a whole new way of reporting, a whole new way of thinking about our institutions and ourselves as people. Jaspreet, may I bring you in next? And thanks so much, Nikwat.
And thank you so much. And I think it's a blessing to have everyone here in this space. So yeah, I think from a Sikh perspective, I will say, Kate, the way we support, or the support network of our community, it has deliberately changed during pandemic personally. And I think the Gurdwara, our place of worship, is very much a hospital, is very much a center where people can come and speak to other, like mental health support, but on the other side, spiritual elements. But the core aspect is also langar, which is providing food and basically sharing everything what you've got. So during the pandemic, what I've seen before, people used to come and congregate at Gurdwara Sahib. But thanks to the youth, I love being a youngster. Then what happened was, due to COVID, quite a lot of old age elderlies and quite a lot of vulnerable people, they were not able to come to Gurdwara Sahib. And what happened was youth then going out and supporting these elderly. So especially the place where I'm from, what we did, started a food, we call it Sikh Soup Kitchen. So started a little food bank. So everyone used to go on Soho Road and distribute quite a lot of goods and toiletries and other stuff to people who may be really, really poor. But then on the other side, have cars and actually go and deliver food to those who may not be able to afford food during these hard times. So I think it's very much aspect which was given to us by our Guru Sahibs. So which is during the hardest times of the needs. So a Sikh should be a person who should go to other homes and serve. So it's just that idea. During a pandemic in Delhi, our Guru Sahib went home to home and helped people. So it's just that thing that we can't stay at home if the world is burning. So I think, yeah, so definitely the way we support communities and help other people, it has deliberately changed. So just to sum up, before people used to come to Gurdwara Sahib, but now with help of young legs and young arms, youngsters are going out and serving others.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Jaspreet. The idea of service, of course, is so embedded in Sikhi, but it's changing, and it must be the same for the other faiths as well. Mary, welcome, and can I bring you in now, please? Thanks so much.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Mary. I am a Methodist youth rep, and I, from my personal experience over the last year, I've really noticed sort of church platforms, like on a larger scale rather than sort of individual church communities. Like there's been a really wonderful shift to a much bigger focus on faith and well-being, which I know I've really appreciated, and just various like youth programs and Instagram accounts and Twitter accounts and all of this social media, and there's been a really great output of sort of trying to ground your faith and your well-being and sort of finding strength and calming your anxieties, and I've really appreciated that. I struggle with anxiety, and I wrote an article at the beginning of the year about how hard it is sometimes to be living as a person of faith with anxiety when people just tell you to trust in God. And that's really hard because I'm anxious and everything is out of control and it feels like things are too much. But sort of constant trickles through my social media feed of prayers and sort of little audio clips of people sharing thoughts for the day. And I think there's been a really conscious effort to sort of, as you were saying, Iso, like to digitalize aspects of worship. And I just think that sort of element of, yeah, like grounding your mental health and grounding your well-being in your faith, I think has been something really wonderful that's come out of the past year.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Mary. It sounds like the communities that you're all speaking of in a way have responded and have been forced to change. I mean, I'm a teacher, and I tell you what, the lockdown has forced us all to learn to use Google Classroom. We've been sent on millions of training sessions, and we're just like, oh well, I won't bother learning that. But we've done it. We've sorted it out. So we've on a really steep learning curve, haven't we? Okay, so I don't know if you feel this a little bit outside your remit or not, but just speaking from your own experiences and your own positions, what do you think then the wider world? So of course this is an audience of media and sort of journo people. What do you think the wider world needs to know about these changes, these shifts, these developments? Maybe it's a bit more digital now, maybe a bit more democratic, might we say, or using members of the community in a different way. What would you say is worth knowing about and sort of noting in these changes and developments? I honestly don't mind who wants to go first.
I think I'm going to go for an example of reporting that I have seen that I think was really effective in terms of the reaction that I noted on social media. Was in October just gone. The Guardian wrote a piece about the value to society of, this was about the Church of England, but I think it goes for all kind of faith communities, and there's been such a big switch, as we've all noted, in terms of the kind of more food banks and the more practical side of faith and serving those in the local community, whether they believe or not, and really just offering up the members of the faith community as resources for the wider community. And I think that value is so essential to see. And I think particularly interesting is the mindset switch for those in the community that haven't previously engaged with faith communities, but have now kind of almost not been forced to, but have had to depend on these communities. I know a kind of personal example is my grandfather, who hasn't engaged with church in the past, but through being vulnerable and elderly, and needing, at the very start of the pandemic at least, needing to get food but not being able to get any of the food slots, kind of relying on his church and not being used to that whatsoever. And I've seen so many similar stories of those different things, and I think that value to society has been so interesting to see how that's developed. That I know that research was done by State of Life with the National Church Trust, but yeah, that switch from those that aren't engaging to having to engage is really interesting, and just the wider contribution to society, kind of monetarily, practically, spiritually and pastorally, is yeah, really interesting to see.
Absolutely, and we think about how the stark inequalities in our society have been laid bare in the pandemic. I'm sure that the faith communities have all surged to fill so many of those gaps. And interesting that you say your grandfather, who was not really necessarily inclined to be a church member, you still said his church is still there for him.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether he wants it or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jaspreet, can I ask you to speak on this next? Is that okay to ask you?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
And I think it's been really interesting. And I have to applaud all the journalists who've covered very positive stories about how people of religion helped other people during this pandemic. And I think it's really beautiful that how this idea of compassion, which is very much in all the religions, we were able to see that in action. So it's really, really beautiful. But then on the other side, personally, I think just being a youngster, we need to think about sometimes these things can be really PR exercises. So which can be, I don't know, there's a race, one religion is better than other or not. So it can seem that it sometimes I did feel that it was happening, but it's really interesting. And I think something which wider communities need to understand that actually this is a duty of a religious person to be compassionate, to be out there during a hard time is the duty. Like we have to do it. Why? Because we are mandated by Almighty. So I think there's an understanding that actually, so we can say good stuff about religions, but still, I think those ideas the about the mandate. If you're representative of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, then you have to do these certain things in the community. And I think hopefully one day our understanding at that level so that we can't be there just running again like I'm better than you or you're better than me, but still doing actions together on a bigger level and saying we have better things to serve humanity with. So yes, I think it's interesting, it's applaudable, but still I think there need to be a lot of work which needs to be done to be reported upon in saying that actually the thread which is binding all these beautiful religions together is the idea of service, is the idea of compassion during these hard times. So yeah.
Well, I wonder if it will be made a bit easier because it's very much not abstract, is it? I mean, of course, practical help is never abstract; it's always concrete and on the ground. But this is it's very visible, the practical ways faith communities can support a community, whether the people they're working with are from within that background or not. I wonder if it will make life for reporters a little bit easier. Like as you say about the Langar, it's really, I've read in so many different towns, the Langar has really expanded its reach, as it well. It's always been its theological reach, but its practical reach. That might be an easy way for reporters to kind of hook into the community in their area.
Yeah, exactly.
Mary, do you have any comments to this question, or yeah?
Yeah. Thanks. So I think for me, sort of the two main things I think are worth talking about and worth sort of reporting on. One, in terms of how much more accessible churches in particular have been forced to become, and in many ways they should have been this way for a long time. But I think the fact that for a large group of people, the fact that it's online makes it a lot more accessible, and for another group of people, it makes it less accessible. So it's a two-way thing. But I think people have been forced to get used to technology. And I know my dad's here today, and he hates technology, but he's doing it and he does a good job. And I think that's a really great thing. And I think it's something that we can really take into this new normal of we know we can do it, and we know that we can make church inclusive and accessible to groups of people who may not be able to come into the church physically. And I think that's really wonderful. And I think the other thing that is well worth reporting on is just how much of a community churches can be, and how many people I know have found faith communities to be their rock during this whole year, which I think is wonderful. And yeah, that's it for me. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I mean, I hear what your dad's saying about technology, and it's amazing working with teenagers who are just like, oh, miss, just do this. I'm like, what did you do? Okay, last question. I'm going to slightly conflate our third and fourth questions. So when we were planning this session, we thought about the idea of how far reporting on religion and belief, and I guess change, how far the reporting is keeping up with the changes. I think we've maybe partially addressed that. And then how far the communities themselves are keeping up with the changes. So I wonder, I think we might just maybe the four of you between us address these last two questions together for our last 4 minutes. How far is reporting on religion and belief keeping up with the changes? And do you have any suggestions about where reporters might look? I mean, how far are communities of belief themselves keeping up with the changes? And again, do you have suggestions for reporters about an interesting place to look? I think I'm going to start with you again, Izzo, because I've done you the first time for every question. I hope that's okay. Already falling into patterns, aren't we?
That's absolutely fine. Yeah, I think there's often a wider focus on national rather than local, and whilst that can be a good indication of general trends, I think there are so many amazing stories in the local. I think throughout the pandemic, particularly in the first lockdown, I feel there was that kind of local unity and a switch kind of in society wider than just in kind of faith and religion to that local mindset of everyone kind of, I think with like the clapping for carers and stuff like that, really having that community feel. And I think out of that mentality, lots of local stories have really have been really innovative and really shown kind of giant leaps for churches and faith communities. But also there have been areas where churches haven't needed to provide that innovation because the wider community has come to the church in lots of areas and realised that actually the provision that was already there is something that is really suitable for them or really comforting in different ways. I know the badminton benefice in the Diocese of Gloucester, the Church of England, has had more than 8,500 views on its services, its Book of Common Prayer services, which are ancient, really old services, which is amazing that these communities have discovered this resource and have really gone with it and have found it really comforting and something to rely on amongst the pandemic. So as much as there is lots of innovation, particularly in local communities, also these faith and religion communities haven't necessarily needed always to find new things to do. They've been able to rely on the kind of centuries old things that they've always done.
Wonderful, thanks Izzo. Helpful that the Book of Common Prayer is online now. You can just sort of get it on the internet, can't you? Excellent. Now with our last 2 minutes, do either of the last three speakers have anything they'd like to share about the communities themselves keeping up with changes, and maybe a point for reporters on where they might look for changes?
Yeah, so just about sort of reporters reporting on changes. I read an article, I think maybe a couple months ago, and it was, can't remember who it was or what newspaper it was with, but it was talking about how young people have engaged with religion and faith over lockdown. And I was like, great, this is what I'm really interested in. And it was an article of almost entirely statistics, and there was not a single young person's voice in there. And I personally, maybe this is just me as a drama student talking who hates maths, but I personally find statistics are not that helpful. Like, they have a place, but they're not that helpful when you're talking about how young people have engaged with religion. It's not that helpful to just go, well, 87%. It's like, what does that mean? Like I find that like a human response almost is much more interesting and gives a lot more and says a lot more. But yeah, like you said, Izzo, like it does give a good indication of national trends. But yeah, I'm not a fan of statistics.
So we need the human stories. As a philosopher myself, I also can't understand a sentence with numbers in, but we need the human stories. Thanks so much. Okay, so over to you then, Nick.
So first and foremost, I think as Mary said, and respect to you for talking about this as well, I didn't actually introduce myself. So I'm someone who runs an award-winning mental health community interest company. We work with racialized communities. Specifically, we have a focus on the Muslim diaspora in relation to how mental health shows up within our bodies and within our minds. And we have a basis of focusing on science and spirituality. So if you're interested in having that discussion, then there's ourselves to go towards. In relation to how communities of religion and belief are keeping up with change, I think that faith is in constant evolution because we are as people as well. And in the context of the Quran, so the book in which obviously I follow, this is a living document. Even though it hasn't changed since its foundation, it still applies to the context of the time in which we live in. So for example, in Arabic, the word lion has 200 translations, so it can be read in 200 different ways. So when you've got a book which is yay big, it's going to be applied according differently. And obviously in Islam we have something called fiqh, which is Islamic jurisprudence. So when obviously the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away, after that you then had different schools of thought as Ahmadi, Shia and Sunnis, who then apply things with Islamic jurisprudence. My background's in law, not drama, even though I probably should have done drama, which would have been a lot easier for my, well, say easy, but anyway, that's a whole other conversation. So I think in relation to how it's in constant evolution and constant change, it's us as people, as individuals, that are moving alongside religion as a cause, because obviously religion in some sense is a form of social evolution. So we are changing. Obviously, you have to consider in Islam in 1858, the Ottoman Empire decriminalized homosexuality, which I think centuries ago is something that people wouldn't be able to conceive of. Then you have to consider Pakistan, which is unfortunately very regressive when it comes to LGBT rights, but when it comes to trans rights, are very, very progressive in relation to passing a bill which allows trans people to self-identify themselves, have trans anchors, and they're actually protected characteristics. So it's evolving because we as people are evolving as well. And I look forward to seeing how we continue to keep up with changes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks to the four of you so much for your answers. It's so lovely to have you. I wish I could also have you in my classroom. I think my students would absolutely love to meet you.